In the traditional administrative law course, basically most professors use a casebook, and there are a number of casebooks out there in the field. This course is different because what we do is we start off with the novel Jurassic Park. I have the students read that, and then I tell them we're going to pretend as if Jurassic Park really happened, and you're going to take that as a problem. We'll divide you into teams. And then the students work as teams to figure out as a class how they want to regulate the release of dinosaur DNA into the biosphere, and whether they want to do anything like create a governmentally sponsored dinosaur park or allow private companies to have dinosaur parks as well. And then they work in teams to put together basically legislation around the regulation of dinosaur parks. I remember reading Jurassic Park before the movie came out, and in the novel, Michael Crichton says in the foreword, in the intro, that all of this could have happened, what happened in Jurassic Park, because there's no government regulation of the field. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. So here's this field and there's no government regulation. What that means is if I do a simulation, the students can't go to a statute that already exists and just copy it. They'd have to really be working from scratch. And so I thought that would really be fertile ground for doing this sort of thing, and it's proved to be true. I've taught this class since 2003. I would say and I've taught it now 4 times. I started teaching this way for a couple of reasons. One is that substantively, I did feel like in the class under the case method, students learn sort of the trees of administrative law. They learn these cases and they learn these very specific things, but they're not seeing the overall forest. The only way to do that is to sort of take an overall legislative regulatory scheme and really look at it in whole. And in the Jurassic Park class, they usually go to these schemes to sort of pull together their own, and at the end they produce their own legislative scheme, a fully completed regulatory sort of network, and so they're able to see the forest in addition to the trees. They use the cases to sort of decide how they should go ahead and draft the legislation. So that's the substantive reason. The procedural reason is just my philosophy of teaching in law school. I think the first year works pretty well. In the second and third year, I think the students should be in the role of lawyer. And in Jurassic Park, they're in the role of a drafting lawyer, a lawyer who drafts legislation, and they're in role. They're in their teams, they have their responsibilities, and they have their own responsibility for making sure that the statute reflects the law. And so they are more or less in the role of sort of drafting lawyers, and I treat them that way in the class. And so really the students are doing it rather than me sort of talking about it. These are ill-structured scenarios. All I do is put into place the basic foundation, and then the students can take it in whatever direction they want. It is challenging because sometimes I have to go back to my office and learn some things that I didn't know, but that makes it rewarding as well. Of course, they have to do a lot of research. The first thing they have to do is figure out what in the area of sort of cloning and release of DNA into the biosphere is already regulated. And there is some regulation. When I first started teaching this class, there wasn't much, but now some regulation has developed both at the federal level and even at the state level, if you can believe that. And so we now have a team that sort of is in charge of doing that research for the class. But in addition, everybody else has to research to come up with a statutory scheme that more or less fits what they want to do. Students are not interested in drafting from scratch. They like to have some sort of model that they can edit, and so all the teams go off and look at a statute that might be analogous to this one, and there are some out there. There are large regulatory schemes, anything in the environmental area. The Nuclear Regulatory Act is a good one. Students sort of feel like a nuclear plant meltdown is somewhat akin to a T-Rex running through a town and eating people up. And so there's probably stuff in the Nuclear Regulatory Act that they can use. I love that because in the process they have to look at a statute from the ground up, one of these statutes that is a large regulatory scheme, and then they have to figure out how it works for them. In other words, they have to really interrogate it closely to see what they can use. And so every time they do that, they're learning more and more about what I said before, the forest instead of the trees, the forest of administrative law, how it all fits together, what an agency looks like from the ground up, how it's structured, what kinds of, what the commission looks like. All of that they see when they do this research.
I took Professor Corrada's administrative law class, his first one that he did Jurassic Park, in 2003. I think the Jurassic Park class helped me in my other classes, especially when I got to like the clinic, the law school clinic. I was in the family law clinic, because I think that when you take just regular traditional law school classes, you read a case, you understand the case, you say what the case is about, and you're done with it. Whereas with the Jurassic Park class that Professor Corrada taught, you have to build on each of the cases, and you have to take, not just a case in isolation, but all of them together for a concept of, in that case, administrative law, or in another class, some other topic, some other type of law. You have to, kind of combine them all together and get them into a cohesive unit. And I think for me, when I took his class, I got that. I understood better how to bring everything together instead of reading individual cases throughout the class, because, anyone can read an individual case and regurgitate what it's about. But it's a whole different thing to take 2 cases and 3 cases and 4 cases and just keep building on them.
Students need work on drafting, and they need to understand how to draft. In a lot of the other courses, they get they get some background in how to draft letters and memos and briefs. Very seldom do they really have a course where they have a chance to draft legislation, and yet they're working with legislation all the time. So here's an opportunity to sort of, have them learn some things about legislation, which is it's better if it's straightforward, if it's simple, if you really think about what you're doing and what the legislation should say. So there aren't too many classes like that in law school. And of course, the only way to really learn that well is to go through a number of drafts. And in this class, it's great because the teams produce their own drafts that they rework, but then at the end, it's all put together, and then they're also working on the larger draft and how it connects up. And they learn a lot, not only about regulation and administrative law that way, but also about how to write concisely.
Learning how to pay attention to details through that class definitely carried over into my other classes. I mean, it was an awareness that I guess I'd always felt like I was a good writer, but I'd never really paid attention as to the critical nature as I did after the class. I definitely felt more like I was learning how to be a lawyer in the Jurassic Park class. And I noticed that when I took the law school clinic, the family law clinic, that I had a different sense of confidence, because I could look back and say, okay, I did that, so I should be able to figure out how to draft a motion or something like that, because it's much smaller than what we drafted in Jurassic Park, because that was a pretty big piece of legislation that we put together. So I think that it helped me feel more, at least for that class, and then for some of the other classes, that I had a sense of how to be a real lawyer.
You have students enroll as attorneys, working on their own, doing a lot of the work with guidance from the professor. And to me, that's what the upper level classes should be like. They're going to be lawyers very soon, and so they should be doing most of the stuff on their own with professor guidance. Another benefit of the peer teaching that I didn't think about is students want to help themselves. So there's much more participation by students in a student-led class. In the regular class, the students are mostly trying to stay away from any kind of discussion. They don't really want to engage the professor, I've found, in a lot of classes. But when they know they're going to be up there as a peer teacher, they know they're going to rely on the students to contribute, and so they contribute as well. And that is something I never thought about. That's sort of an ancillary benefit. Well, most of the students I've talked to feel like it's a different kind of class, unlike anything else they have in law school. They do feel like they learn a lot more about administrative law than they learn in the classes where they just have cases. They like the Jurassic Park scenario. Most of them are familiar with Jurassic Park, and so it's an engaging sort of scenario.
It's a great conversation starter. When something comes up of, tell me about your favorite law school class, or do you have any experience drafting legislation?